Well, again, good morning, everybody. I know this is, it's over here. I know this is advertised in the program as a conversation with the director and the directors. But before we bring up the founding director, Chuck Schroeder, I wanted to have Sam Cordes come up and visit with us briefly. Sam, right after I was asked to play a leadership role in the creation of the Rural Futures Institute, one of the very first things I did was call Sam Cordes, who I found out when I called him, he had just retired either that day or the day before as the vice provost at Purdue University for Engagement and as a co-director of an institute on community development. And so I wanted and people have told me that was by far the best decision that I have made during my tenure here in this kind of getting the RFI, setting a basis for that. So I thought I'd ask Sam to maybe explain why you so drastically changed your retirement plans to take on this. He was very committed, required a lot of time as the senior advisor for the team that was working to create this.
Well, thanks, Mark. Thanks for those nice compliments. I'm not sure they'll deserve, but I'll accept that. Good morning, everyone. In response to your question, I've known you for a long time, and you've always been a disruptive factor in my life, and this was no exception. Last night I went back. I never delete any email. I think I have as much as NSA perhaps. And last night I went and looked at my email, and on August 31, which was my very last day of full-time employment at Purdue, at 12:29 p.m., 4 hours and 1 minute, no, 4 hours and 31 minutes before I was out of there, on my way to Colorado to celebrate my retirement by doing a little skydiving. I wanted to kind of test the waters because that's one of those activities where the old adage, if at first you don't succeed, try again, doesn't work. And I thought, so if I can get through that, that means that I've got a pretty good track ahead of me. And your email says there are some developments around the RFI, and I would very much appreciate your insight on the process. We're also interested in exploring your interest in being more intimately involved in developing the RFI, and you still have time to go fly fishing or rodeoing. I looked at it last night. So anyway, on my way across the country, I stopped and had spent a little time with Mark and Roni, and I could tell, even though it was still at a very, very early stage, to say the least, that there was something going on here that was different than anything that I had ever seen anywhere before in roughly almost 4 decades of working at a number of different land-grant universities, including here in the area of rural and community development. I just had that sixth sense, and it's been validated on what has happened in the last 18 to 24 months. And there's about 5 or 6, maybe 7 things that I think make this different from a lot of other great work that I've seen, including some that I think I've done myself during that 30 or 40 year period. There's been some great work at this university and others in the area of rural and community development, little pockets of 1 or 2 people here, a small center there, etc. Generally trying to create a little excitement elsewhere in the university and further up the food chain, and sometimes with a little bit of success. Always polite acknowledgement, but not too much beyond that for the most part. But here we had a situation, and this would be my first point that makes it so different and exciting, and I could pick up on it that first time I met with you and Roni. This was being driven at the very highest levels by the regents, by the president, by the chancellors, the deans, and that is unprecedented. As I mentioned, it's usually the other way around. There's a faculty member or 2 who are trying to get a little attention for the important work going on in this area. The second thing, though, was it became clear that this was not just rhetoric, and that can be looked at in a number of different ways. Everything from the first conference to this one, to the fact that $750,000 in grants have already gone out. There's more than $1 million, if I did the math right a few minutes ago, going to be going out this time. And even other indicators. I remember the first conference in May. JB, I don't think he ever left the room. University presidents are pretty darn busy people, and this level of commitment was something that I had never seen. So it wasn't just rhetoric. There was real action and commitment behind it. The third thing is that it involves all 4 campuses, the entire system of the University of Nebraska. That would be like Purdue and West Lafayette and Fort Wayne and Calumet and some other places coming together. I mean, good luck. That ain't going to happen. So to have that entire system in support of this as a priority. The other thing, I don't want to get into the organizational structure, but this is being run out of the systems level office. It's not tucked down in some one campus or within one department or one college or whatever. And as an academic and knowing how this university politics work, I'm telling you that is very significant. There's a relatively small staff, 4 or 5 people. The funds, the resources are not being used to create some infrastructure of within a certain little part of the university. They're being kicked out to where the best ideas are. These grants that you'll be hearing more about illustrate that. And the culture of this thing is illustrated by collaborative, transdisciplinary, and the scope of this. As an economist, I hate to say it, but it goes beyond economics. And, there's a lot to the world beyond economics. And so much of the work in the past is focused just on that. And, of course, that's important. But here we're talking about the arts, the humanities, the culture, a very broad scope. And the University of Nebraska, all 4 campuses have a huge amount to say about all of these. And the bold, ambitious, risk-taking vision here is something that is unheard of in my many years of experience in this. And I'm reminded of Daniel Burnham, that it's basically the architect of the modern day Chicago, to use an urban metaphor. He says, make no little plans. They have no magic to stir men's blood. And what you're seeing here is something that's of that vintage. So those are just some, and I could go on and on about things that really got me excited and attracted me to, and I appreciate so much the opportunity to work with you and Roni and others on this. It's been an amazing and exciting venture and journey. There's a huge amount of work left before of us, but as Roni said last night, the ball's up in the air being tipped, and it's up to the rest of the folks, all of us, to catch it and do something with it, and we will.
Yeah, I agree, and you have been essential to getting us to where we are. I appreciate it.
Okay.
And I just, was thinking with 2 economists on the stage, we could really mess this thing up if we wanted to.
What's that?
We could, I said 2 economists on the stage, we
Oh,
could
yeah,
really,
right, yeah.
create a future that
yeah.
people probably wouldn't want. But
Yeah.
anyway.
I would add one other thing that I think is interesting. That economists think about resources, right? But the sort of funding model here is significant too. Of course, we want and the unicameral and federal government and stuff, those traditional streams, to be helpful. But the reality is that's probably can only go so far in today's budgetary climate. Grants and contracts, of course, you want to do that. But there's a huge interest here, at least as I understand it, that this is important enough that we should be thinking about an endowment to support this kind of work. And again, in my many years of working in this area, things like that have just never ever crossed anyone's mind. This is, and I'm not being, this isn't hubris or whatever. I again worked in this area for a long time, and I think I've had a modest amount of success and seen a lot of my colleagues have a fair amount of success. But this is at a scale and a scope that's just unprecedented.
Yeah, great. Well, one of the other things that you helped us think about and develop, along with Chuck Hibbard, the UNL Extension Dean, was to create a position the position description for the founding executive director position. And it was kind of an unusual position. You know, a lot of times in these university-based institutes, you get somebody that's got a long pedigree of publishing and things like that. And that's not to say those aren't important, but we really were looking for something different. And can you kind of talk about why that was important?
Yeah. Well, yeah, I can, of course. I mean, I wasn't on the search committee or whatever, but as in my advising role, we talked about things like this, about what that position description should look like. And it wasn't my idea, but I certainly agreed that the net needed to be cast broadly. I've loved my many years, decades in higher education, but I do have a bit of a love-hate relationship with it too, because we can be, President Jefferson last night talked about pseudo-aristocratic or whatever, and we can get into that so much. And, but when in the case of the RFI and the director position was being announced, again, it went back on these core values of being different and creative and bold and so on, and that, we're not looking for the necessarily the thinking, or we don't need to think about this in the same way if we were wanting to recruit the next great research scientist in biomedical engineering or nanotechnology or 3D printing or something like that. Certainly you would want somebody with extensive research track record, the next Nobel laureate and PhD and all of that kind of stuff. And that doesn't mean that couldn't happen in this one too, but let's think, we're really talking about something that involves reimagining the land-grant university in support of rural Nebraska, the rural Great Plains, rural America, the importance of being able to create partnerships, perhaps having lived that life in the rural hinterland somewhere, the passion that goes along with it, the ability to pull people together and be collaborative and get things moving, having a huge vision, again on the order that JB mentioned or Daniel Burnham, and that's not necessarily going to be linked to how many exactly your credentials, but in terms of numbers of degrees and so on. And that's the way, though, that we often think about these things within universities. And I'm glad that the decision was made to cast the net broadly, because that lockstep thinking that we typically take from what we're looking for when we're hiring a research scientist and taking it into an area like this, can take you down some incredibly bizarre roles. I mean, you can think, well, Jesus, you just think how successful Mark Zuckerberg or Bill Gates would have been if they hadn't dropped out of college. Well, wait a minute. Maybe there's something to be said for other capabilities beyond just the traditional way of looking at the way we hire people. So I'm glad you cast the net broadly.
Yeah, and we are too. And we ended up with 4 exceptional finalists for this position, and through that process, and they came from very diverse backgrounds, high-level government in Washington, D.C., somebody who had created 2 or 3 institutes at another university, and a person who has a long history of economic development and administration in that area. And then the one that we ended up choosing, or Dr. Green ended up choosing, Chuck Schroeder, and why don't you come on up and join us now, Chuck, the founding executive director of the Rural Futures Institute. As Sam said, this Rural Futures Institute is focused beyond economics, and we are also trying to build relationships across the spectrum of organizations and people that are interested in. And the unique capacity that Chuck has is that he's done all that. He's been in leadership in government, leadership in industry, leadership at the university-related foundation efforts, and most recently, the CEO of the National Cowboy and Western Heritage Museum, which puts him with a unique set of experiences. And I thought maybe we could just ask you, first of all, what attracted you to this position? And secondly, how do you see those roles that you've played preparing you?
Well, Sam said earlier, this is the most remarkable effort to help rural people in places that perhaps has ever been done, certainly in my lifetime. I didn't just grow up on a ranch. I did spend the first 30 years of my life in a community of 600 people. So I not only was raised there, but I launched my career there. I started my family there. I learned the responsibilities of citizenship in a small community right there. And I believe that's important. I learned living in that small rural community that it didn't confine my view of the world and my access to the world to Hays County. In fact, some young people were reminding me last night of a conversation we had a few months ago. It was not uncommon at our dinner table to have scientists and leaders in education and industry and thinkers and writers from around the country and around the world that my parents would come across in various roles and invite to come spend some time with us. And so it wasn't uncommon to have those conversations at our dinner table. But I was raised in a family environment where there was an expectation that there were 6 children in our family, and there was an expectation that we would have broad-ranging interests and that we would pursue those interests. I think sometimes my father thought my interests were a little too broad-ranging and maybe should be sharper focused. Fortunately, my mother did not, and she won. But it really has defined my life. There was never a notion that what you're doing today necessarily creates a wall around what you might do tomorrow. So, and I honestly never really expected to leave that community. I thought I would spend my career there. But 1983, I thought rural people were being kicked around by powers greater than they, and somebody ought to do something. So got involved in government and politics, and once again, as partisan and parochial as we see politics today, I was very blessed to go into a political environment where I knew nothing and was mentored by folks like Don Nelson, who's in this crowd today, who, I was a Republican coming to work for a Democrat. And there was this notion that we had respect for people on both sides of the aisles and that we were looking for good ideas and interesting ideas, and we weren't afraid to engage people we disagreed with in order to find solutions. And I still consider today that to have been one of the great growing up periods of my life in just looking at the world in a little different way. Went from there to the University of Nebraska Foundation. I and my family have had long-standing belief that research, education, and engagement are critical to a strong democracy and a strong state and a strong country, a strong community, if you will. So that, again, and here was an opportunity over 9 years there to not only work with folks with whom I was familiar on the UNL campus, but had the opportunity then to work with folks first at the Med Center and then at UNO and then UNK as the University of Nebraska Kearney became part of the system, and we established a foundation office there. Established an office in Scotts Bluff. Then National Cattlemen's Beef Association comes along. Actually, it didn't exist yet. Some of my old heroes in that industry had a big idea for reshaping even globally the way the U.S. beef industry approached its business. So I followed that interest and had the opportunity to work not only across the country with rural people and rural enterprises, but to go to other parts of the world and take up the battle, if you will, on behalf of the U.S. beef industry in some interesting times, particularly in Tokyo and with our neighbors to the north and south. So it was an interesting time. Then along came the National Cowboy Museum, which my father had taken me to visit the old Cowboy Hall of Fame when I was a senior in high school, and believed so much that here was an enterprise that grew out of literally nothing. Most museums start as a building looking for a collection or a collection looking for a building, Here was a group of people that had nothing more than a big idea that somebody somewhere should honor the history and heritage of people in the American West and the remarkable things that they did to create an economy and a society in an area that had been marked on the map as uninhabitable. So I was intrigued by that. As I shared with Lynn Ziegenbein this morning, a rational person would have taken a little sharper look at the finances before they took that job, and then found out we were $21 million in long-term debt and at the back end of a $2 million line of credit. And so, as my dear father told me when I left the ranch in '83, always remember two things. 2 and 2 must always come out 4, and don't be stupid. And I thought I may have violated both of those in going to the Cowboy Museum. But we worked through those things over 10 years and not only put it on sound financial footing, but quite honestly, I believe helped reestablish the integrity of the institution for the people that it represents. So as I come to the Rural Futures Institute, I guess I have been so intrigued with the moving beyond boundaries theme here. I've been very fortunate to have always lived with, including my own family and colleagues, lived with people who thought that we weren't restricted in our interests, and we weren't restricted in the kinds of people that we could draw into problem solving and dream chasing in a lot of different environments. And when I had the opportunity to look seriously at what was going on with the Rural Futures Institute, the dream that's here, and that it does go beyond economics. It doesn't ignore economics, but it does go beyond that, and does acknowledge that a strong rural sector is vital to the United States of America. It's vital to states like Nebraska and those communities from Calgary to Corpus Christi, particularly here in the middle section of the country, but it's true across shore to shore. It's important to people around the world. I've had the opportunity to travel in a number of other countries, several in Europe this last year, and believe me, the strength of rural communities is a concern to nations around the world. And when I had the opportunity to perhaps be involved in the boldest, most borderless effort that's ever been undertaken to help rural people in places, I simply couldn't ignore it for the comfort that I felt living in Oklahoma. So,
well, we are thrilled to death. I know in talking with you earlier on that you were really happy where you were, enjoying what you were doing, basking a little bit in some very good success that you've created in that. And so we were really thrilled that you would be willing to step away that and again step beyond a boundary and take on a new challenge for the benefit of not only your growth, which will happen, but also the benefit of the rural parts of Nebraska, the Great Plains of Nebraska, and ultimately beyond. So thank you very much.
well, strictly an honor for me. So
Yeah.
looking forward to it.
Well, there were two things that when we met, I agree. There were two things at the end of the last conference. We did a survey of the participants, and there were two things that came back that people really would like to see in a follow-up conference. Number one was to meet the new executive director, and you've heard a little bit from him this morning, and you'll have a chance to hear, as JB mentioned, a lot more from him tomorrow, and we're all looking forward to that. The other thing they wanted to do was hear a little bit about the grants, what came out of the grant program. And so I would like to invite some of the people who participated in the grants up to join us on the stage now. There'll also be a breakout session tomorrow that will focus primarily on the teaching and engagement grants. So you'll have an opportunity to learn even more. And hopefully as you see these people either in a video or on stage or tomorrow in that one breakout session, you'll as you were charged with by Bob Bartee, go up and meet them, visit with them, explore ideas as well. So thank you very much for joining us on the podium. Yeah. So what I would like to have you do, and maybe we'll start with you, Roni and Sandy, about kind of describe your program a little bit and how you see it. One of the things that we wanted these grants to do was to be beneficial to rural communities, first and foremost, obviously, but also beneficial to the students that are involved in these projects and the faculty. So tell us a little about your project.
Okay. Our project focuses on rural leadership and providing an opportunity for rural leaders to connect and collaborate and work together to develop as leaders. As we started to look into rural leadership, we realized that in rural communities, because the number of people is smaller than in urban communities, many adults are called upon to become leaders in their communities, whether it's business leaders, civic leaders, leaders for nonprofits, entrepreneurs, but the opportunities for growth and development for those leaders is smaller because of the distance and because of the fewer number of people that are available. So we decided to combine our strengths from the Center for Collaboration Science, which includes members from different colleges within the University of Nebraska at Omaha, and create what we called crowd learning, the ability to learn in a team, in a group, in a virtual manner, and our knowledge about leader development from management and industrial organizational psychology, and put all of that together. And we're currently working on developing that program, which we hope to launch in January.
Okay, great. Stephanie?
First of all, I'd just like to thank everyone for this opportunity, and this grant is putting food on my table, so thank you for that. My biggest struggle with this project is just saying the word rural, which I still struggle with. But what I've learned is just leadership development in rural communities is such a win-win. These communities need rural leaders, to just survive and also to thrive, but it's such a benefit for the individual. And the leaders we've talked to are just involved in so many different areas. It's so exciting to see the excitement and the passion that these young leaders have in community gardens and museums and art exhibits and breweries and all these crazy diverse things that they're gaining experiences from. It's just a really great lesson. And I think for me, and to say to the other youth in the room too, being a leader in rural communities can give you the opportunities that you don't have in urban communities, and it offers a lot. So it's a really exciting project.
Great.
Gotten to know a lot of great people.
Yeah. I have messed up, which I am apt to do. I was supposed to queue up a video that talked a little bit about the grants prior to engaging you. So we'll take a little break and we'll queue up that video.
Red Cloud, Nebraska is the childhood home of Willa Cather. Residents like Susie Schultz work hard to preserve the town's proud legacy.
It's important that we embrace our history here and save it for people to see.
Enter Jared Kenobi and Jeff Story, two University of Nebraska students who spent the summer in Red Cloud.
Here in Red Cloud, we're doing everything from community cleanup days to assessing the historic housing.
We're putting college students into rural America and making a difference.
The student internships were funded through a grant from the Rural Futures Institute. The Rural Community Serviceship Program places student teams in small towns. Students help the community with a project and learn lessons along the way.
Being put in a community where you have no connections and having to be adaptable to everything that comes up, I think it was a really good experience for me going into the world after graduation to be able to do that in any place that I go.
It'll help revitalize America in itself when you revitalize the small communities.
In its first year, the Rural Futures Institute awarded 11 grants totaling $750,000. 6 teaching and engagement grants provided funding for service learning and outreach. 5 grants funded research projects.
The research and engagement, those are up to $150,000, encouraging work across departments, across campuses, and even partnering with outside organizations and partners to do the research.
One research project is a collaboration among extension educators in Nebraska, South Dakota, and North Dakota. The goal is to help small towns market themselves and attract new residents.
This program really brings people together at the local level to talk about issues, but it's also a way to take those ideas and issues and put them into an action plan and see results from it.
In Hot Springs, South Dakota, residents gather through a process called study circles. Researchers want to know if these community conversations help boost confidence and attract residents.
Marketing Hometown America is able to take the research that we've done the past couple of years and really connect it to some practical conversations that happen in communities. Then hopefully the practical conversations will lead to some projects and some actual new marketing ideas that happen in the rural communities that we're working with.
Back in the 1920s and the 1880s, I mean, it was a boom town. There's a lot of potential here, and if we just capitalize on what we really have, we can bring that back.
We have to take a look at our town. How do we market it, and how do we want to be looked at by the people over the next 5, 10, 20 years?
Extension educators produced a study circles guide and trained facilitators to lead the process.
We put together a Marketing Hometown America guide that communities can use and bring people together to work through step by step through a process to get input so that they can market to potential new residents.
Support for this project through the Rural Futures Institute has been very significant. Rural communities don't have a lot of extra cash to pay for research like this, but yet if we can get them interested and get them going in the projects, there's some great things that come out of it.
Another project supports research needed to turn potential into economic growth.
We know that each of the communities that we work with in this pilot grant will be different based on their size and based on where they're located in the state. So we are studying that. We're studying about the different characteristics that communities use to embrace change. The long-term goal is that the communities that we're working with develop some kind of a plan, an action plan.
Through research, teaching, and engagement, rural communities blaze a trail into the future.
We were pleased that we had engagement from all of the campuses of the University of Nebraska, and we will be continuing on an annual basis to provide these opportunities to do further research and teaching.
Okay. We'll get back on schedule a little bit. So what communities did you end up?
Right now we're casting a very wide net. So we had interviews with a number of established leaders to have a better understanding of what leadership in rural communities looks like. And to build our training better to suit those individuals that will be in it. And we're in the process of recruiting young emerging leaders from across the state into this program, and Stephanie is actually taking care of that effort, so I'll let her talk.
Yeah, we're still recruiting participants. We have participants already from all over, from Valentine, Scottsbluff, to Tecumseh, basically the state. So we're really excited to bring these people together and get the conversations going around these cases. The cases that we're developing I think are engaging. I hope they're engaging, but they are really unique issues that I wasn't expecting to see and hear about. Just the extent to which these people are, not only on the Board of Education and the Water Board, but doing things, they're really putting the culture back in agriculture. When he said that, it really hit home, because I can see the culture just developing and thriving already, and their plans, where they're going in the future. Hopefully that will be inspiring to other leaders, and it'll be sort of a ripple effect and a snowball effect, and we'll see it all sort of happen.
Okay, great.
It's exciting.
Great. Well, maybe let's move on to rural sourcing and hear a little bit about your grant and how it's benefiting communities and everyone involved, and who all's involved as well.
Thank you, Mark. My name is Shawn, and I'm from University of Nebraska at Kearney. And I'm here with the real driver behind this project, Paul Eurek, and is Shelley here from the Nebraska Foundation, University of Nebraska Alumni Association. Shelley here by chance? I don't see here, but how our project works is we're trying to address the rural brain drain issue that I know all over the Midwest is affected. And so we reach out to the alumni using our partners with the alumni database through some software developed by Xpanxion that Paul will talk about here in just a moment, to reach out to those folks that if they opt into the system, have you ever thought about bringing your skills, expertise back to a rural community? And so they do that by opting into the system in a certain field. And so in the pilot phase, it's with technology. And I don't know if there's a chance we can get the NebraskaRuralSourcing.org website up on the screen here in just a moment. But we already have several of the Xpanxion jobs posted in rural communities throughout Nebraska. And so we do have the jobs posted. They are live. It has not been pushed out through the targeted alumni database just yet. So we don't have a job in place just yet. But very shortly, we expect that to happen. And then in less than a year, we're going to branch that out to other sectors besides technology, perhaps accounting, engineering, the types of jobs that perhaps would be easily done in a home office or in a main street of a rural community. And so that's the strategy over the next year. And I'll have to say that I'm just from the university trying to facilitate and get out of the way from the good ideas that we're talking about. And so I'll let Paul talk about how we came up with this idea and a little bit of the history there.
Okay. Hey, good morning, everybody, and welcome to the conference. Yeah, like Shawn said, it was an old idea that had been sitting in a desk drawer, for 5 or 6 years, and the whole concept of, how do we bring some of the best and brightest that left Nebraska over the years back into the communities of Nebraska and add a lot of value. A lot of that was because that was a path I took, right? I graduated from the University of Nebraska-Lincoln, left the state, and it took me 20 years to get back with the desire to do that the very first day. My wife and I drove across the state line. So I knew there was a demand and there was an interest of people who left the state that wanted to come back. And so what we did within this pilot is we tried to take a look at it holistically and look at all the different bases we needed to cover. And the key part was to have not just a job, and I've talked to Shawn a lot about making sure that people understood that this wasn't a job site. It's not a job, promoting environment. It's an opportunity. It's an opportunity for people who have left the state, who have a career and have built a career to be able to come back to the state and start new opportunities. And that's either with other people or it's within an organization that exists. The second part of the model was to create not simply opportunities for people, but to take it into a sector that's new and growing, and that is rural sourcing. And the rural sourcing industry has been dominated by, or outsourcing industry really has been dominated by India and China, Eastern Europe, different places in the world, and a lot of times East Coast, West Coast. So we're taking that opportunity and we've matured it and we've moved it into rural Nebraska. And now we are the organization in the place where we're telling people, bring your business opportunities to Nebraska. So we've created the model, we've created the environment, and as Shawn said, with the benefit of the Alumni Association, talk about stepping beyond boundaries. The Nebraska Alumni Association that actually gave us access to the data that has been locked up in vaults like the Coca-Cola secret. For them to step out of the box and give us access to that data and be able to run this model is really what pulled it all together. And so I'm very thankful to Pete Katsiopoulos and the board of the Alumni Association that really took that risk and gambled and said, we will cooperate with the private sector, public sector, nonprofits who work together to try to really promote this model. And so we're really excited about where it's at and where it's going.
That's great. And we didn't have a lot of time, so and I probably failed to introduce each of them separately, but I wasn't going to do a very long introduction anyway. You can find their background in the program, and just to facilitate and make the best use of the time, that's what we hope you do is look up their very excellent biographies of what they've accomplished through the years and why they're up here on stage. And Paul, we really appreciate your engagement as a very busy CEO of your own growing company, large to start out with. It's a wonderful example of the collaboration and cooperation we hope to build among businesses in rural Nebraska. So
if I could brag a little bit about Paul, so Kearney is not a very large town. Most of you have been there. It's 30,000, 2 hours west of here on I-80. And so 6-7 years ago, when he first approached me, I was the director of a small rural economic development organization. I didn't have enough knowledge of the resources to be able to make this happen, but in my current role at UNK, I was able to meet some new friends at the Rural Futures, what was the Rural Initiative, and as this grant program came up, it's a great opportunity. So Paul has experience with this rural sourcing model. He and his son started the office in Kearney with just a few people, and now there's 80-something?
85, right.
In the Kearney office, and then
That's
a
great.
couple in Loop City, 2 or 3 in a small office there in Loop City. So he's got a little experience with this, recruiting professionals back to rural areas, and so that makes not only with the software, the system to do so, but a little experience on the HR end as well. So.
Yeah, the ideas don't have to be brand new. They just, if you bring them out if they're good, we're interested, right?
Mark, anyway, one of the most exciting things for me in getting to know Paul and think about what he's doing with his enterprise, it demonstrates, I hope in our discussions last night with President Jefferson, that perhaps we made the point somewhere along the line that this is not just nostalgia. It is not trying to go back to a rural structure that was and maybe is held dearly in our hearts. That's not what this is about. And here's a classic example of seeing rural communities as an opportunity that is not going backwards, but is truly taking advantage of what is a great resource with new ideas, innovative ideas, and by the way, requiring strong leadership in those communities to create a new rural. And you know, one day, Paul, people are going to be standing around saying, I wish we could go back to the days of old Paul. I remember those days. You'll be the nostalgia.
Yeah.
Thanks, Chad.
Well, that's great. And we'll have a little more of a discussion, but let's get Kathy Tweeten in. Jodi Bruns, who was going to sit in that seat, had a family emergency and was not able to attend, but Kathy Tweeten, who is the director, I'm trying to remember now, at North Dakota State. You're the director of the Center for Community Vitality, and also is an extension educator in community development, and is familiar and friends with Jodi, and she very graciously agreed to take her place. So, Kathy?
Well, thank you, Mark, and I can assure you Jodi would have made a better entrance. I know she would have. But thank you for inviting me, and thank you for inviting Jodi. She does send her regrets, and so she wished she could have been here. But as you saw in the video, our project was really about marketing hometown and bringing in residents. And when you think about North Dakota, I know people think about, well, you've got all kinds of people coming. Why are you marketing for new residents? But the truth of the matter is we still have very rural communities that are looking for new residents. Well, what happened in the small town of Ellendale, which is the town that Jodi's working with, it was amazing. It was one of those unintended consequences, because what happened is that when Jodi held her study circles, which is the process of the communication, the conversation in the community to bring about that plan, to bring in new residents, they found out that they're not marketing to the people that they already have there. And those people were those folks, those students and faculty at their small college. That small college has about a $2 million payroll. It has about 200 students, and the community didn't even recognize that this was a wonderful asset to their community. They didn't look at it that way. And so I talked to Jodi just a little bit ago, and she informed me that good things are already happening. One thing that the college has already done, the students decided to have a trunk Trunk and treat, they called it. The college students, they all decorated their cars, they brought out some candy and some other treats, and they invited the community. They communicated through Jodi. She put an announcement in the school, and they had a wonderful turnout to their trunk and treat. And Jodi said the communications are already starting to happen. The president of the Chamber of Commerce is very involved. The chamber is trying to be involved. They've started a $1 off student, $1 off pizza at the local convenience store. Those kinds of things never happened before because they never saw the students as an audience, as somebody they needed to market to. So it's really interesting how things happen, and it was totally unexpected.
Yeah, that's great. It's kind of, this is probably a bad analogy, but it's kind of like LinkedIn, I guess it is, where you have your connections, which is us with you, but then you have the secondary connections, and hopefully that's what happens with all of these grants and with everything else that we as a large community, not just within the RFI, but all our partners, that grows, and we have these unintended consequences.
So I just wanted to ask probably Shawn and Paul, and Kathy, you might want to contribute too. Do you have any sort of initial profile or thoughts about the motivation of those folks that have roots previously in Nebraska or North Dakota and coming back in terms of age, motivation, or is it just kind of random?
I've got a couple colleagues out in the field, Cheryl Burkhardt-Kriesel and Randy Cantrell. Raise your hand, you're out there somewhere. So they did a project where they studied some folks out in the Panhandle. So we're building up existing university research, and so they've learned a lot of lessons based on interviewing people that have moved back to the Panhandle of central Nebraska, and so ways to approach those alumni. And so as we set up this system, we're trying to integrate what we've learned from their research, in fact, that research. But that being said, I appreciate you asking, Sam, because I'm going to reach out to the audience. There's a couple of phases with the rural sourcing thing, the push to the actual jobs that are out there, but then there's what is a rural sourcing job. So if you are an employer and you're trying to find jobs to come back to this rural area, it's not just taking an accounting practice, for an example, and just taking over an existing well, that's great, there is a job there, but we would like you to take the money from, Kansas City or Denver and bring some of those clients and their money back to the rural area. And then if they need to apply for a job, they could post a job they're looking for on the system. So to become a rural sourcing partner like Xpanxion is doing that, and to be able to do that, I'll need all of your help to spread the word about becoming a rural sourcing company if you know employers that are also struggling to find jobs for those people. But there will be criteria that we will have posted. So yes, we are building off research, and I'll let.
Yeah, so Sam, this is an industry. It's a new industry, right? It's not simply just taking existing companies and adding jobs to them. It's really on the opposite end of the spectrum. It's a brand new industry. So what we believe in being able to recruit people back is if we create those industries, create that industry, as Shawn said, in the different sectors, technology, healthcare, legal, accounting, right, the high-level professional jobs, and you have all those people that have left Nebraska over the last 15, 20, 30 years that have gained that experience, and then tell them there's a new industry opportunity. It's kind of like pioneers, right? You come back to Nebraska and all of a sudden you set up an industry that now caters to people in California, New York, Florida, where most of our business comes from is Atlanta, Georgia, Boston, and Dallas. So if you get those guys creating those opportunities, then the profile becomes, seasoned business professionals who have gained the experience, who can come down here and basically step into virgin territory of a new industry with very little competition. And it's very exciting, right? I mean, it's, so that's one side of it. The other side of it, in a part of our equation, is really the legislature, who's passed some tremendous legislation over the last, 4 to 8 years. Governor Heineman and Senator Hadley out of Kearney, who's helped us a lot, to be able to set up legislation that allows us to create entrepreneur companies. The other part of the equation of this website, basically, or this opportunity site, is for entrepreneurs who are starting new businesses. So I'm also the chairman of a group called Invest Nebraska. And in that role, the state and the Department of Economic Development has entrusted about $8 million to our organization to start up new companies across Nebraska. And so as these companies are starting up, we're trying to do everything we can to mitigate the risk of these investments with your money, quite frankly. And so in doing that, we're investing in companies, and then we're using the data that the Nebraska Alumni Association is giving us in anchoring those companies with seasoned executives who left Nebraska, who come back. What a great opportunity for former Nebraskans. What a great opportunity for Nebraska.
If I could jump in just too, this was definitely a theme in our interviews. So many of these leaders, went away for college and ended up coming back, and we wanted to know why. And it really comes back not only the experiences that they have to get on board and start these new things that the communities don't maybe not have yet, but it's just the family values and they themselves being raised in those rural communities and seeing what it was like as a kid. And some of them even just mentioned having the open spaces just cleared their head and allowed them to come up with these new ideas and to make a bigger impact, and they wanted to raise their kids in that same environment. And so it was really neat to see how the strong family values really pulled people back in. That's something I can attest to too.
We are also finding that this is true. North Dakota has been for many years getting older. Our population has been getting older, and we've just recently seen the reverse of that. And a lot of the people that are coming back, not only to the rural communities, but also to the larger communities, they're talking about those family values. They're talking about how nice it is to come home. And now that there are job opportunities, it's easier to do that. And so those relationships are important, but it's also a relationship to the community, which is what Ellendale is doing right now.
Like North Dakota, it looks like this end of the stage is getting older. I don't know this. I wish we had some more time to talk, but in keeping the conference moving on, we're going to have to move on to this segment of the program. But thank you very, very much for coming up and sharing a little bit. And I hope that you all take advantage of them now that you can recognize who they are and come up and visit with them more about their experience with this grant program. So thank you.
Program, please come see me and I'd be happy to sign you up.
And if you have the other piece on the website, you can see that. But Sam asked about profiling. So if you know of people that fit these profiles that we're discussing, people that have come back, business professionals, we would like to interview them and post their examples. So as we push the opportunities out to the alumni, they can see success stories of how people have done this, how people have brought their business and their expertise back to their hometowns, and we post that. And so as the opportunities are pushed out to alumni, they can relate a little bit better. So again, I'm asking for your help in emailing me success stories of people you know that have done that. So,
just a quick question: Is this something that you see going beyond just Nebraska, the rural sourcing ultimately?
Ultimately, it should, right? I mean, the interesting thing about the business model we're creating is that we're finding senior level executives who are scattered from one end of this country to the other, who are up, high in the organization of companies we work with. We just did a deal with Sony, right? We found a Nebraska executive, and Fiserv, and Cox, and these guys are not only in Nebraska, but they're from Iowa State, they're from Missouri, they're from Kansas State. So eventually, this will move out to other communities.
Yeah, that's great. Well, thank you very much for sharing your experiences. So we've got.
So, Mark, we clearly do not have enough time. Now, this was pretty fun.
Yeah.
You had to be struck as we went through each of our panelists here with the importance of leadership. When we, back in 1985 or 6, whenever it was in the midst of the egg crisis, when there were all kinds of analyses being done that said, rural communities that had a population less than 1,000, an ag-based economy, were over 30 miles from the interstate, couldn't survive. They were going away. Well, a number of us thought that was baloney, to be polite. And so undertook a little study of some communities that we had observed in Nebraska, as small as 200 people up to 4,000 or 5,000. And of course, resulted in the 20 Clues for Rural Community Survival that the Heartland Center has used very effectively in helping build rural community leadership now over almost 30 years. But the fundamental issue, and here we were in the worst economic time for rural people since the Depression. Every clue would say they're probably right, can't make it. But here were people defying those odds, maintaining vibrant, relevant, forward-moving communities, and it all came down to leadership. And people in that community that had a vision, that had a dream, that were combining both head and heart to move their communities forward, and it worked, and it continues to work. And it's why I think you end up with 500 people coming to the Rural Futures Conference who still believe. Again, that evidence is still out there. There are still people making that argument that these communities can't make it. Damn it, they just keep doing it. You know? Anyway, I thought there were some very powerful examples of that sitting right here on this stage. So.
Yeah, we get these narratives that get in place, and then it's so hard to change them. Another thing that I think is somewhat connected to this that bothers me about a narrative about not just rural Nebraska, but maybe America, is that, it's because of the success of strong individuals going out and conquering the frontier. That's part of the narrative, but there were also threshing bees and barn raisings and building the community churches that we don't hear much of, and that was an important part of the narrative as well. And I think that's where we're focused, is more on building those community efforts that have made so much difference in the rural parts of the country.
Yeah, I will tell you, from the standpoint of the National Cowboy Museum, and needless to say, we study that notion. Yeah, I'm just giving them time to get up here. So send them on. We study at significant depth what happened to allow this remarkable accomplishment of establishing economy and culture in the western two-thirds of the U.S. And we always think about the independence of the cowboy, and there's truth in that, but it also relies just as much on neighborliness and a notion of communities taking care of one another. I mean, not only raising their barns and harvesting their crops, but handling their own law enforcement, doing a lot of things to make sure that their neighbors were taken care of. And by the way, that is still true in so many rural communities today, and it's part of the reason that seasoned executives are looking upon that lifestyle. Young executives, young people starting their careers are looking at that lifestyle and saying, I think there's something there that is worth my investment.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, another really, really important part of what we want the Rural Futures Institute to do is to build great partnerships in order to make the most of the resources that are available to engage with communities and help them reach their preferred futures. And so we've invited up some representatives of the different kind of partners. We probably don't have all of them on stage, but so we have Barry Dunn, who's the Dean of the College of Agricultural Sciences at South Dakota State. We have Skerratt, who is the head of, the Center of Rural Policy at the Rural College of Scotland. We have Milan, who is the co-founder and director of the Heartland Center for Leadership here. That's based, at least he's based in Lincoln. And we have BJ Reed, who's the Senior Vice Chancellor for Academic Affairs at the University of Nebraska, Omaha, which everybody kind of talks about being the urban campus, but which in fact is very interested. BJ has been an excellent partner and a leader, really, in the creation of this institute. So first of all, welcome to all of you. And Barry, maybe we'll just start with you on why you're here, for one thing. What makes you feel like this might be a great partnership to be involved with?
Well, thank you, Mark. And it's a pleasure to be here. And I want to thanks for the invitation. Thanks for the opportunity. But most importantly, I want to congratulate the leadership of the University of Nebraska system in this endeavor. I think it is a key part of our future. We have so much in common. And so as to why South Dakota, and we have colleagues here today, I have colleagues here today, I think the notion that we are stronger together and that we have more in common. We certainly, you whipped us in football pretty badly, but we still have more in common than we do, than we have in differences. And so we're just excited that have been included. And I compliment the leadership in creating an institute that looks beyond boundaries, and that's certainly one of the themes today. So I think that state boundaries, whether they should have been square or however they are, don't need to be roadblocks to success. And we have the challenges that we face in South Dakota are, as you could see from the video, very similar to all the challenges that are faced by rural Nebraskans or Kansans.
Yeah, across the plains. Yeah, great. Thank you. Sarah, you've come all the way from Scotland to participate in this conference, and I think part of your agenda is to explore building relationships with Rural Futures as it moves forward. Can you share with us a little bit about why you're here?
Well, I was very fortunate last August to meet with Roni Green and to hear about the Rural Futures Institute. I'm here to listen and to learn. It's very important for us to hear what the grand challenges are that you face, what we call societal challenges in Europe, and to look at what's similar, what's different, to question our assumptions, to question your assumptions, and really to learn what the norms are that we operate within and that you operate within. And that helps us to identify different ways to address these challenges. So that's the main reason I'm here, is to listen, to learn, to be challenged.
Okay, great. Milan, you've been actually involved in some of the discussions that we've had around how the Rural Future should proceed. Your Heartland Center for Leadership is already an important collaborator, has participating in one of the grants. But just what's your vision for the RFI to start with, and then how you see the center collaborating?
As others have said, I think University of Nebraska has made an impressive commitment, and I guess one of the things that impressed me from the get-go about the whole concept surrounding the Rural Futures Institute was the notion that the university could collaborate with other institutions of higher education as well as other kinds of organizations, not only within the Great Plains, but across the country and around the world. As Chuck Schroeder can attest, as a member of the founding board of the Heartland Center for Leadership Development, we've been committed to strategic alliances since this organization was founded. Among our first alliances were with the state of Nebraska when Chuck was a staff member at the Department of Agriculture. And Chuck may not remember this, but I remember distinctly that when we were at the very front end of getting the Heartland Center off the ground, I said to Chuck one day, "Gosh, I could really use an intern." And he said, "I happen to have one that I'll give to you." And that intern was Craig Schroeder, who's the president of our board today, Chuck. And so we have really looked for ways to create collaborations that have benefited our own mission at the Heartland Center as well as our collaborating partners since our founding in 1987. And I saw the RFI as a way to expand upon into, I think, really even more exciting territory, the many partnerships we've had with the University of Nebraska over these years.
Great, thank you. BJ, you have also been very instrumental in getting this up and running. And, that's maybe a little surprising to some, since you're the Senior Vice Chancellor of what's seen as the urban campus. Talk to us a little bit about why you felt it's important to take such a strong role in this.
I think I started really from the moment I got to UNO in 1982, spending most of my time in rural Nebraska. So I came from an organization called the National League of Cities, and I basically did small town rural community work for them. So it was natural for me to go out. I think my first project was a management project in Alliance. I've been kind of wedded to it from the very beginning, and gosh, Milan and Sam had lots of hair when I first met them, so it's been a long time in rural Nebraska, and I grew up in western Kansas, so a lot of roots in that. So a lot of people, as Mark said, think of Metropolitan University as being devoid or disconnected from rural parts of the state or greater Nebraska. And I can remember when Roni came to our campus, I think it was spring of 2010, and wanted to have a forum about the Rural Futures Institute and to bring faculty together. I think we had 45 or 50 faculty at that event, with many who couldn't be there. And Ronnie Reiter, who was up on the stage before, is an indication of a lot of interest that we have in greater Nebraska and issues that affect rural communities particularly. We're heavily involved in community development, economic development, capacity building, leadership development, all of those things. So it's really important to UNO and to Omaha. If greater Nebraska and rural parts of Nebraska aren't successful, Omaha is not going to be successful. So there's a natural connection to that. And I was just happy to be invited to participate and to get involved. And I think we've got a lot of folks who are very interested.
Sure, Ab, just jump in.
I think also what's so exciting about the Institute is its commitment to making a difference. And it's not an elite institution that's inward looking, but already through its projects, it's out there listening and working with communities and also seeking to impact on policy. And those are things that drive us back home at Scotland's Rural College as well. So there's that mutual desire to have a beneficial impact.
Great. So do you have any, as Chuck takes over the reins of leadership, do you have any strong recommendations to him on how he can build an even stronger collaboration between your respective organizations, besides giving you a lot of money?
I'll speak real quickly. I think the multidisciplinary approach is really critical for me to make this work. I think we're going to have to, we have 4 campuses. I work well with all 4 campuses, but I think we really have, we can't take for granted that takes work and that takes effort to do. And I guess, Chuck, my comment is work really hard on that piece of it. Because I think there are great resources on all 4 campuses, many of whom don't know each other and are doing work in similar areas. And I think if we can build that cross-cutting capacity within the structure of the Rural Futures Institute, this can be wildly successful. If we don't do that, I worry about the long-term connection to it. And that also goes, obviously, to sister institutions outside the state. But that's one I would emphasize heavily.
I guess, Mark, one of the things I would add to that is that the future of the Rural Futures Institute is not dependent just on collaboration among the institutional partners like those of us who are on the stage right now, but it's going to depend even more heavily on collaboration with our community partners.
Exactly.
And we need to make sure that our relationships with our communities are structured such that they are equal partners or perhaps better than that, so that whatever we're doing is perceived at the community level as having real added value. If all we're doing is going out and repeating the same old platitudes, frankly, this won't make any difference to anybody. If we are truly committed to the kind of partnership that's represented by the mission and vision of RFI, it will make a difference, I hope, mainly where rural people live, not where rural institutions office.
Yeah, I would say a key is identifying the grand challenges and how we're all seeking to address those. What are those challenges from multiple levels, from community through private and third sector up to policy, and how are we seeking to identify those and creating a focus around those as a starting point.
I'll take a little different tack, Chuck, and go back in time a little bit, not quite back to Jefferson's time. But in 1878, my wife's great-grandfather homesteaded on the land that we live on, and then he built the house we live in. And that very same year, my mother's family was placed on the Rosebud Indian Reservation because they're Native American. And I think that irony is enormous. And I would challenge the Institute to, not out of guilt or looking backwards, but to look forward with the fastest growing population in South Dakota, to look forward with the 4 reservations in Nebraska, the 9 in South Dakota, and in a spirit of partnership with the future, help those communities on those reservations deal with the toughest health challenges, educational challenges, and economic development challenges in our region, and do it in a spirit of reaching across boundaries, not down or back, but forward, and having the courage to do that. It is, at South Dakota State, the president and the provost and I have made a very intentional effort, and our staff has, in Todd County, South Dakota, in 2011, we had 2 4-H clubs, 1 Native American, 1 white. Separate is not equal. We now have 1. They display at the Rosebud Fair. We have to do things differently, and we have to have the challenge to solve some really tough challenges in rural America that include not just those in this room that are comfortable and have certainly benefited from settlement, but the Aboriginal people who were perhaps ignored for a century and a half here.
Sure. Mark, if I can respond to that, thank you. I couldn't agree more, and I will. Folks that were involved in the focus group sessions that I went through in the interview process will know that I talked at some length about working with Native American communities, and one of the great blessings that I've had in living in Oklahoma for 12 years is the opportunity to work with a variety of Native American communities, some that are enormously successful economically, the Chickasaws in particular, who have been great investors in the Cowboy Museum, but also who have a very serious rural community development effort underway, and we're already talking about their connection to us in the Institute. But it is a challenge, but also an enormous opportunity. Here are people that are very enterprising who, believe me, who have a base of culture, as you know, that overwhelms other considerations. And we have things to learn from that, to capitalize upon, and to help them in building their communities in ways that are meaningful to them. So I appreciate you bringing it up, because I will tell you that it is a personal mission of mine, and we're already taking some steps in that direction.
Thanks.
You know, as I was listening to the conversation, Mark, I was thinking back to last year's conference. Not all of you were here, but quite a few were, and the keynote speaker, Franz Johansson, talked about diversity drives innovation. And I think what we need to focus on, among other things, really is the concept of innovation. I'm not talking just about business innovation or new products, new services, and that kind of thing. I'm talking about sort of, human and institutional innovation, and the idea that diversity drives innovation, whether it's what we can learn from native communities, what we can learn from people in Scotland, what the connections between the rural and the urban, that's such an artificial distinction because they're so intertwined economically and socially and culturally and in terms of heritage. And even statistically, this stuff doesn't make any sense. I mean, Nebraska just lost, I don't know, 80,000 rural people here in the last couple of years because Grand Island, Hall County flipped over to urban. It's now classified as a metro county, right? So it's not as though a bunch of rural people died or left Nebraska. It's because a county was so successful, it's now become a metropolitan county. So, and these collaborations that were being displayed here on the stage are collaborations, for the most part, involve diverse kinds of actors, organizations, and institutions. And that's hard work. Milan is always, I steal one of his best lines. He said, "This isn't rocket science, it's a lot more difficult than rocket science." And that's true, to establish these deep collaborations that go beyond exchanging just newsletters or having coffee once a week or something like that, and really get into sharing of resources like, hey, here's my internship, or my intern, why don't you take, and it's out of that trust and those conversations and collaborations and the diversity of thought associated with those that innovation springs, and that's really the future.
We have a couple of mics up, and we've got about 10 minutes left. So if anybody wants to join the conversation with a comment or a question, please feel free. We'll keep an eye on them, but that's not we can continue up here as well.
Mark, while people are making their way to the mics, I wanted to respond to BJ in just a moment. The diversity of interest. BJ, number one, I take very seriously the notion of it'll be hard work, but the most important work that we'll do in the early going and in sustaining the RFI is building those collaborative relationships across campuses, across organizations, and in communities. Till the day I die, I will never forget coming to Omaha for my first serious conversation about the RFI. And I thought I was walking into a hotel room with probably 3 or 4 old gray heads from university leadership, no disrespect meant. But, and I thought we would have sort of a classic conversation about, well, what have you done in your career, and here's what we kind of have in mind. Instead, I walk into the room, and here are a dozen people lined up around this horseshoe, Chuck Hibbard. You might have let me know ahead of time. But here were folks from the Med Center, from UNO, from the law school, from the Bureau of Business Research, from UNK, certainly all the campuses, the regions, etc. And I was absolutely overwhelmed with the notion that here is dedicated interest from sources that you're just walking down the street logic wouldn't cause you to think would be that committed to this notion. It completely lit my fire about this thing. It wasn't that I didn't believe it was a good thing, but when I found out there was that much diverse interest in what we're trying to do here, I thought it's something we can't walk away from. And believe me, I take that very seriously, and who wouldn't? It's too much fun. When we talked about everything from economics to social justice, to rural health care, to politics, it was too much fun.
Well, I remember when Roni and I first talked about this, and I challenged him a little bit, and I said, if this is going to be a 4-campus effort, we got to walk the talk on it, because we will commit resources, capacity, and support. But we got to believe that it's a 4-campus effort. And Roni, to his credit, has sent no message but that he was very serious about that. And Chuck, I have no doubt you believe the same thing. And Mark, when he came and talked, and Sam, they all said the same thing. So the message has been very consistent. So I think the table's set for this. the key is carrying it out and getting it done. So I share your excitement and enthusiasm.
I see we have a couple of questions. Let's go to let's Mike first.
Hi there. I would like you guys to speak a little bit more on your research and policy activities, having been in some different fora where places like the Brookings Institution, which they do major research and policy initiatives. And I remember one time where I was at this national conference for sustainable communities, and they have one of their lead people from Brookings Institution. They were talking about how it was all about metropolitan areas and how everyone needed to move to the cities because that's where the future was at if we wanted to compete with India and China economically. And I want you guys to think about, a lot of times this boils down to economy and economics. And you've got major institutions like Brookings Institution who, whether you like it or not, massively influence American politics and where we invest. And if we don't have institutions like this pushing research and policy and doing the kinds of work that will inform other ways of thinking about economics, I don't see how we can win out in the end as rural communities. So I wanted you to speak to that. Like, what do you think about that on a national scale, or where are we headed with that, so that it's not just the Brookings institutions of the world that are pushing the metro major economy agenda. Thanks.
Thank you. You want to take a stab?
Well, I'm happy to. You make a very good point, and do understand that one of the 5 principal functioning elements of the Rural Futures Institute, and I'll talk about this a bit more tomorrow, is in the area of public policy. And public policy defined fairly broadly. And of course, we're looking at relationships with folks like the Rural Policy Research Institute that I helped to get off the ground a number of years ago, so I believe very much in their work, FAPRI, others along that line. But I will tell you that in my mind, 10 years from now, I would expect the Rural Futures Institute to have a very major presence in the area of public policy, and again, broadly defined, as that gets into education policy, economic policy broadly. I think we have to be a powerful voice in that arena, or we have not only missed the opportunity because of the collaborative work of this institute, but we probably will have failed in our mission. So I think it's enormously important.
And just to add a point, another potential partner that's not up here that we will work with, I think quite closely, or Chuck will, is RFI, which is the Rural Policy Research Institute, and that will give that we can leverage their expertise along with our commitment to make a difference in that. The other thing I would say is that as Thomas Jefferson spoke last night about government needing to be, not national, not the state necessarily. It should start with local. And I think no matter what the Brookings Institute says, if we have committed people in communities that believe they can have a positive future, which is what we want to help communities do, we can be successful in that.
I would just add that you mentioned the Brookings and RFI, and RFI is specifically working right now on creating everything from data to stories to narratives. I don't know, I can't think of a better word, and counter isn't the right one, but the sort of the Brookings notion of, it's all about mega cities, and that's where all of the opportunities, that's where all the growth is, and it's those broad brush kinds of statements that are so problematic, and it gets back to what Chuck was saying about with the Heartland Center and so on. The narrative that the only places that have opportunities are those that of certain size along interstate and so on, and we know that's not true. But Brookings has a pretty good platform there, and when you look at all the op-eds, that's about all you all you read. So your point is very well taken. That needs to be done and done seriously. RUPRI, and I think the Rural Futures Institute can be helpful to that. And you know, there are places, some urban places aren't doing so well. I think Detroit's having a little trouble. Maybe some others too. So, yeah.
Yeah.
One more comment from here.
I think also, certainly what we've found in the Rural Policy Centre in Scotland is a lot of it's about building relationships, which take time, and building relationships with those in policy, both those in the government at different levels and also civil servants. So we understand the policy timeline and where we can inject impartial evidence, but we also spend time listening to them, the language they use, the drivers they face. So we share that mutual understanding. So the relationship building is a priority for us.
Great, thank you. We'll take the two that are standing will be the last two questions.
Good morning, I'm Jeannie Surface from the Department of Educational Leadership at University of Nebraska at Omaha. And of course, my big question is, what about K-12 schools? How are we going to mesh this partnership, and where are we going to go with this? There was a project about 10 years ago or so that I was heavily involved in that is called School at the Center. Some of you may remember it. And it seems like that sort of idea would be a great piece to bring into this, to get our K-12 schools involved. Anyway.
I'll tackle that.
Great.
At the Heartland Center, we've on numerous occasions did what we could to try to strengthen rural and community partnerships, particularly with respect to planning for the future. And many of those attempts did not succeed, to be very frank about it. And I think one of the reasons they have not succeeded is because, we saw those as institutional partnerships between the city council and the school board rather than collaborations that affected what happened starting in kindergarten. So I just want to give you an example of a community that I was in last week that I think is doing something pretty significant. I was in Trainer, Iowa, where the Trainer State Bank has started something called the TS Bank Institute. And the TS Bank Institute's mission is basically to increase financial literacy K to 12 in school districts where their bank has a corporate presence. They've hired 3 people to work with schools. They're working with 41 school districts right now, helping teachers in those districts gather up resources and expertise to help young people figure out what it means to be effective managers of their own financial resources. The school I was in Trainer has a school bank, and kindergartners are in there every week when the bank is open, 1 hour a week, putting deposits into their own accounts. And then I spoke to kids through the senior year who had been participants in that particular effort. So I'm not saying, every community should be focused on financial literacy. What I'm saying is there's an example of a partnership that's working right now that's making a difference in how kids picture their own future. And when I spoke to the seniors in high school who had been participants in this program now for 4 years, and I asked them what a difference it made in their lives, what they all said was, I never thought I could save this kind of money. When I said, what are you saving it for? They all said, for college. And I said, where are you getting the money? And they all had jobs, which I just think represents the kinds of things that work. Again, if we're focused on partnerships that benefit, to borrow USDA rural development terminology, the ultimate beneficiaries.
I would also say, we have 3 very good colleges of education across the system. I know, Kearney spends a lot of time working on capacity issues. I know Marjorie Kostelnik at Lincoln at UNL does. I know we just established a new Superintendent's Leadership Academy where we want to build basically administrative and leadership capacity and in rural school districts throughout the state, as well as in the Omaha area. We have 3 colleges of business that link in to those issues in an extensive way. I think this, again, is if we can figure out what those tasks are and where those areas where we can do reciprocal work between the communities and the university, we have capacity. We have significant capacity to make a difference. We've just got to row in the same direction on those issues.
Well, real quickly, but I think we need to be very, very honest about this. Rural schools have a great challenge in STEM, and we cannot leave those young people behind. Agriculture is not just about showing a calf at the fair. This is about the science and technology behind. For them to be competitive in the world that faces them, we need to get really serious about STEM in rural schools. And it doesn't measure up right now, and that is a huge challenge.
We're cutting into the break, so maybe we should move on to the one last question, and then we'll get you to your break and some networking time.
And there is a lot more to talk about in K-12 education, let me just say.
You can do that tomorrow.
Thank you. All right.
Thank you very much. I'm Chad Nabity. I am from that area that is no longer rural in Nebraska, from Grand Island. And interestingly enough, I was elected as the Small Town and Rural Planning Division Chair of the American Planning Association 2 weeks before we got the announcement that we were no longer small town and rural. So that's one of the things that I wanted to bring up, was that rural urban and how do we define rural. Rural is almost always defined by what it's not. We define it in its absence. We need to find some sort of positive definition of rural. And the other thing that I wanted to comment on is that I am very glad to see that this is a 4-campus effort, because I am a graduate of 2 of those campuses, including NCTA. So just a comment that I wanted to make. But the definition of rural, I think, is really a key factor, and rural changes, because rural New York is not the same as rural Nebraska, because Grand Island is rural New York.
Yeah, good point. Well, the one last thing, go ahead, Seth.
No, you go ahead, and I do want the last word after your last word.
No, I don't know if that. I want the last word after Sam's last word. Do you want the last word after my last word?
Yeah, I'll take the last word, yeah.
Thank you, David. Well, then I get the very last word. But anyway, we've had really great representation up here for partnerships, but as Milan pointed out, the one that is really missing and is probably the most important partner are the communities in rural Nebraska and the rural Great Plains and in the future beyond that. This will not be successful if we do not engage early with the communities as full partners, with them as full partners in what we do. And I think it's really important to recognize that, so that those of you out there representing rural communities know that that's what this is, the commitment of this institute is. So you can have the last word.
Okay, well, the last word is actually about you. I'm so delighted that Chuck, that you're going to be leading this effort. You're just extraordinarily suited for it. It's in great hands. But Mark, you have done an extraordinary job as interim director, and it's been my pleasure to work with you, but that's not the point. This has been a huge undertaking. You're a full-time farmer, you've had other kinds of diversions, and I just want to acknowledge, and I want the audience to help acknowledge the tremendous job you've done over the last year and a half, bringing this to where it is.
Well, I would be remiss to then say that I have an excellent team of people that I work with. You couldn't have asked for a better group of people to work with. Chuck, you're very fortunate to now be working with these people. as well as excellent partnerships. Every time I went out and asked B.J. Reed or Charlie Bisak from UNK or Bob Barty or anyone from the campuses, to participate, they were right on spot, ready to do it. And so, as well as the partners outside the university. So it's been an excellent experience. I've just been really happy to serve. And with that, I want to thank the panel for coming up and sharing your thoughts with us. Again, we didn't have enough time, but hopefully people will engage with you as we go to the break. Again, thank the first panel. This thing is, if we have commitments and people like this, it will be successful. So thank you. And you head off to your break.